what happened? I do not know. It simply went and was like, the video has ended. No, it has not. We are still in the midst of Vietnam. Interesting, though, that I was saying that there was no way for us to get our way out of Vietnam. We were stuck in Vietnam, and the video was like, I'll show you how we get out of Vietnam. We're done. I tell you, it has a mind of its own, this technology. It's like Terminator. It'll just sort of turn on us one day. If you've never seen Terminator, that makes sense. It does, in some sense. All right, let's go back to Vietnam for a moment. The United States is here to help out France because France wants to remain as a colonial power there. Who aren't we helping out? That's important to note. The fellow in the picture, Ho Chi Minh, is the leader of a movement in North Vietnam that is trying to create an independent, socialist Vietnam. You see, that's the tricky part, is that second part, socialist. The United States policymakers have a large problem seeing past that. Ho Chi Minh is going to use a lot of very American terms in pledging the independence and the freedom of the people of Vietnam. He's been doing it, in all fairness, since the Versailles Conference. Ho Chi Minh's at the Versailles Conference, if we go back 25 years here, trying to push for world support for an independent Vietnam away from colonial holding. And unfortunately, the world is saying to him, it just doesn't fit. It just doesn't work in the logistical game board of the world. We can't support your independence there. What does Ho Chi Minh believe that's so dangerous? Well, he's a socialist. That's the problem. In the eyes of American policymakers, we fundamentally believed that Vietnam was a domino. We had, in essence, lost the Soviet Union. Now, when Truman makes these decisions, China's not gone yet. But let's put that onto the puzzle as part of it. We believe that every single domino of Asia is a domino we need to protect. And when Truman makes the decision to fund the French occupation here, he's trying to avoid this smaller country falling to socialism as well. Now, Ho Chi Minh would say to you, hold on, I'm not a pawn. I am not Stalin's guy, right? I'm not later on Mao Zedong's guy. I am my own independent regime. If any country on the planet has had enough of being people's puppets, it's us. We have no interest in that. We want to be our own independent regime. And Ho Chi Minh would say to you, look at our economy. We are not an industrial superpower. We grow rice. That's our primary export at that point. We want to grow it. We want to export it. We want to use those proceeds to fund the ideas of the people of Vietnam. And in that way, Ho Chi Minh would sell you on the idea that the regime he wants to create can be an independent socialist regime without the aid of the Chinese and the Soviet Union. In other words, we're not a pawn. Now, down the road of the Vietnam War, there will be a heavy amount of aid from the Chinese and the Soviets into the war as the United States gets involved. But at this early stage, Ho Chi Minh could say to you, that's not who we are. And American policymakers, unfortunately, tied up with trying to please our friends, the French, and unable to see beyond the socialist portion of things, can't see the nationalist in Ho Chi Minh. And that's where America's Vietnam policy almost immediately gets off on the wrong foot. That we don't purely understand what it is that Ho Chi Minh is trying to do, and we don't think that he can do it without becoming a pawn and being a pawn of those other regimes. Lastly, the conflict in Korea. The Korean conflict, sometimes referred to as the Forgotten War, because World War II happens in 1945, and this one is 5 years later, and then Vietnam comes along and gets far more publicity and hype in that sense. But the Korean conflict, or the Korean War, is an incredibly important one for us. And it is, by the way, the sweetest of the Washington, D.C. memorials. Have you ever been to been to Washington, D.C., and you've seen the memorials? You know, Lincoln's pretty sweet sitting there. Jefferson's neat. The Washington one has never made a lot of sense to me. Wish it were cooler, but sorry, Washington. Okay? And then you walk along the long mall there. It's all beautiful. And the Vietnam Wall is there with every name of an American who passed away in the war. But the Korean one is the sweetest. You come upon it. And here comes these soldiers creeping out of the brush. Oh, it is cool. I happened to visit it for the first time like 25 years ago on a cold, like it was an April morning. I was visiting a friend who was going to med school, and it was just really cool. It was all quiet, and all of a sudden there they were, and I was like, damn, that is so sweet. So sweet. So I just put that out there as being one that, if you haven't seen it, Washington, D.C. is good. It really is a neat kind of panoply of Americanism. Go have a look, okay? Back to Korea. Holiday, where's Korea? Let's hold it right there for a moment. There's Korea. Okay, there it is. Korea, prior to the end of World War II, had never been a divided thing. Korea was Korea. And then it was occupied by the Japanese, a familiar theme as we're seeing here on this Asian side of things, during the period of the 1930s and even prior to that in parts. And through World War II, it was part of the Japanese territory, and then it was liberated, that is to say freed, by the Soviet Union and the United States. And so, in pure Cold War geography lessons, we just split it in half. And the Soviets took the northern part. Now, does the Soviet Union border it? If you looked closely on the map, you can see that there is a far little hook of the Soviet Union that catches the far northeastern corner of North Korea. So there is a border there. And we, the United States, were going to support the South. Okay, what's the goal? Well, the Soviets are going to rebuild the North. We're going to rebuild the South. There wasn't a plan here at reunification. There was a plan at sort of holding on for now. And then, in 1950, the forces of North Korea drove, kind of suddenly, into the South and surprised, I beg your pardon, the Americans who didn't think that they had the capability and the military power to do it, but also the daring to do it. But in they go, and they seize most of the territory of South Korea. Now, I've got a series of 4 maps here. And if you're looking at the maps, what I'm showing you in the first one, the far left one, is what it looked like when the war ends and it's divided, World War II that is. And then I'm showing you in the second one, the swooping in of the North Koreans, okay? And then we'll get to the third one here in a moment. You're Harry Truman. You kind of have a decision to make, but it's not really a decision, because here's the scoreboard. If America doesn't do something here, we're going to look soft. And let's keep in mind, the year prior, 1949, we lost China, and the Soviets got the bomb. And so Harry Truman's sitting there going, I really don't have a choice. I either get myself in a boots-on-the-ground mission in Korea. Here's Truman's problem. Truman's afraid that if he goes to Congress and says, we should go to war in Korea, that a Congress that is already pretty well strapped by the spending of the Cold War and World War II is going to say, yeah, I don't know if that's worth our time, Mr. President. We're not going. So Truman does something that's a little bit skulky and a little bit innovative. He goes to the United Nations, the great peacekeeping arm of the world, and he says to the United Nations, this is an incursion upon the South Korean people. We must go and defend them. Now, that had not been done before, and fair play to Harry Truman. It's a pretty inventive way to get around the U.S. Congress, but he commits American troops through the United Nations as a peacekeeping mission in order to drive the North Koreans out of the South. Now, hold on, Holiday. The Soviets are okay with that? Well, the Soviets, at that point, are boycotting UN meetings because the United States is refusing to allow the new communist government to take its seat at the United Nations. Holy moly, what a perfect set of timing. Truman knows that the Soviets aren't there, so they can't throw a veto down on the table, and in we go. So the United States gets involved with this incursion in order to drive the North Koreans out of the South, and they do. Look at that third image there. Holy moly. We steamroll all the way up to the Yalu River, the northern border of North Korea and China. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is a key moment. So pause. Let's get it together. There are important people within the military. Douglas MacArthur is the leader of that wing. And there are important people within the U.S. government who say, this is the moment. This is it. Why wait, Mr. President? Why sit here and wait for the next 50 years to unfold of the Soviets and the Chinese and their politics? Let's get the bombs out like we did in Japan only 5 years ago, and let's just drop them all. And the initial plan offered to Truman was that we would hit the largest 100 cities in China and the Soviet Union, and we would drive the Cold War into non-existence right here. And we would wait a month, and anything left standing, we would hit the 100 left, and then we would hit the 100 left, and we would hit the 100 left, and we would essentially drive China and the Soviet Union out of the Cold War. This is the moment, Mr. President. You've done it before. Let's drop some bombs. Yeah, that's the moment. And Truman, realizing at this point that although the Soviets have a bomb, they don't necessarily have a delivery device like today, right? You imagine, wait a second, won't they fire it at us? You have to drop these weapons at this point. You don't have, a nuclear submarine sitting 6,000 miles off the American coast and you could hammer San Francisco. It doesn't work that way yet. And so Truman realizes you could do this. You could become the one global superpower. You could destroy your enemies with a band of nuclear weapons. And then, keep in mind what comes next, exactly what you had to do in Japan. You will have to go in, you will have to somehow make the peace against a group of people who will not want to be peaceful with you. And you will have to rebuild their society, you will have to make it strong again, pardon me. It is going to be a heck of a hard thing to do. And Truman, perhaps showing that he's gotten a little bit wiser, holds off here and says, no, we are not going to invade China. We are not going to invade the Soviet Union. We are going to hold our position here. Now, when that happens, as you can tell by the fourth map here, okay, there's those red arrows on the map. That's the Chinese army. About 300,000 Chinese storm into North Korea and drive the Americans into the south. And the conflict continues for a few years after that. The Korean War in the long run is never really solved, right? We hear about this all the time, that the North Koreans and the South Koreans never officially buried the hatchet. And in fact, when the president and the leader of North Korea met, that was one of the things that we dangled out there as being a possibility. Maybe we'll sign a truce here. Maybe we'll kind of finally put this aside. Now, COVID-19 has sort of pushed all foreign policy issues well to the back burner, so we're no longer having that discussion. But for a while there, it looked like one of the longest conflicts of modern history might come to a close, and it simply hasn't happened that way. 33,000 Americans die in the Korean War. That's roughly half what die in Vietnam, and perhaps the reason that we don't talk about the Korean War more, but we ought to. It's an important American moment, and it shows the world that the United States is not just about containment or Cold War money or Cold War logistics like the Berlin airlift. We're about boots on the ground. That if that's what it's going to take, then the Americans will rise to the defense of the freedom of people around the world. What do we have to show for it? Well, a South Korea that's a absolutely high-performing, democratic, highly evolved state. Samsung, Hyundai. Now, I might say that the music is K-pop. That's some good South Korean stuff. I don't like it myself, but I know a lot of people do, and they would be like, yeah, I'm glad we have some K-pop. I know Harry Truman did not go to Korea so that we could have some K-pop, but we have it anyway, okay? My point being that in the long run, this is a divided country, but it's divided because the United States was willing to send troops and to send money and supplies in order to assure that it was not one entire Soviet sphere. Harry Truman's going to leave the presidency for us here in 1952, having weathered a hell of a storm. I said in our last video that Truman, when he leaves office, is a very unpopular president. Americans are kind of like Holiday at a Six Flags ride. You know, let me off, man. I do not like the roller coaster of it all. Americans have weathered a heck of an 8 years under Truman's run, picking up after Roosevelt. There's been the Berlin airlift, and then we had the Soviets getting the bomb, and China fell, and then we were in Korea. And we'll talk about some home front things that go along with Truman as well in our next video. But man, he leaves the office as a fairly unpopular fellow. And then 50 years later, once we've had a chance to reflect on things, we look at it and we go, Harry, you're a pretty good president, my friend. Well done. We appreciate the things that you did. So it goes to show you that history sometimes shows that people are far more popular or far more unpopular, giving a little bit of time to season on the shelf. This is going to be the end of it before spring break for us, ladies and gentlemen. Please watch the videos, keep track of things going across here. I bid you all the peace in the world. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.